Hello guys, thanks for joining me. This is Sifu Adalik from Kung Fu at Home, Master Instructor at Niagara Kung Fu Academy as well, and I want to talk to you today about Cobra Kai, the show on YouTube. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you check it out. And by now you might be thinking, wait a minute, Sifu Adalik, you don't actually do movie and TV show reviews. You are a Kung Fu teacher, and where's our content? Where's our kicks and punches? Well, before I get into that, let me just say I'm aware that usually if you guys have been watching this other stuff on this channel, that no, I don't do movie and TV reviews, but I am going to try today because it's very important and it's very relevant to actual martial arts. And I realized this after watching Cobra Kai. I need to review this and share this with you because as far as self-defense goes, interestingly enough, after some thinking, after a lot of thought, I realized that Cobra Kai is actually the most effective self-defense system in the world from what I can tell and from my experience. And before you're like, what? This is just a stupid video to get attention. Let me go through this with you. Bear with me because this is actually very relevant to self-defense. So if you've watched the show, you hopefully you have, and I guess this is kind of spoilers, I guess, not really. If you've watched the original Karate Kid, you know that the Cobra Kai have 3 rules they go by: strike first, strike hard, and no mercy. Which is funny that that's actually quite effective, but in the movies it's used to kind of portray you know, how the bad guy would think and act. But I'll explain to you why it's not just for the bad guy, it's actually very, very effective for self-defense. And those principles are really principles more than just like, you know, what style is the best and how to punch and how to kick and whether you should be standing and kicking or rolling around on the ground or whatever. All that stuff aside, not important. We're going to focus on those 3 rules and why they're fundamental in self-defense. So let me just give you a little bit of background so you understand where I'm coming from. I'm not just crazy, but I've actually thought this through. Okay, I need to give you a little bit of my personal journey in martial arts. I've had quite a few teachers, but the most influential ones I've ever had, there's 2 of them. One in my actual teacher that I apprenticed under was Grandmaster Philip Manchow of the Wong Han Fun branch of Praying Mantis Kung Fu. And the other one who was a big influence was Peyton Quinn, the creator of the REMCAT system. You might not have heard of it, but these 2 great men, having never heard of each other, never met each other, actually are coming from different spectrums, but have agreed on these same kind of fundamental principles that we're going to be talking about. And actually, Cobra Kai shares these. So Grandmaster Chow, first of all, he's a Praying Mantis Kung Fu Grandmaster, and he learned in the 40s and 50s from Wan Han Fun in Hong Kong at a time when Hong Kong had a lot of styles coming into a small little concentrated area, right? And because of that, they had a good opportunity to test a lot of their techniques because there was always constantly infighting. So a lot of it at that time was kind of street hardened in a way where other systems in mainland China didn't have that same growth and experience at that time, that concentrated time in that small area. So we believe that contributed to a lot of growth and practical modifications to the art around that time. So he had a very direct kind of approach to Mantis Kung Fu. It had to work. It didn't have to be fancy, but it had to be really good for combat, for actual self-defense. That was his approach. And Peyton Quinn, on the other hand, is an author of a great book called Real Fighting, which I highly recommend. I'll see if I can post the link to it down at the bottom here. But he's got a very interesting experience as well. And I first met Peyton back in 2008 when he was promoting the REMCAT system at a bunch of seminars, and it wasn't until 2014 where I took his classes. And his class is a self-defense class, but it specializes in adrenaline response, meaning that it's not about learning fancy moves and if someone grabs you, do this or that, but it's about how to act and react when your body is adrenalized, right? So it's a really fascinating type of training. It doesn't really, you know, it's not specific to any style, but it's very effective. And his whole premise was that if you you know, sit on land, lay on your belly on flat land and practice swimming for 10 years, you'll have really good technique. But if I chuck you in the water, you're probably going to learn to swim a lot faster, even though that's a terrifying thought. So that was kind of his approach to martial arts. It was scenario based, and it worked a lot with the adrenaline, with your adrenal system, and how to act within that system. Whereas a lot of times, if you don't have that kind of training, even if you've done martial arts for a long time, when confronted and you have an adrenal reaction, a lot of times a lot of that training goes out the window because you're not used to that reaction. Well, his concept was to put you in that state and then train you within that state. So the reactions lasted a lifetime. They didn't fade away, even though you might not be training anymore. So those two approaches I find to be very effective from all the martial arts that I've seen, and that's why I've kind of stuck with both of them. So let me get into this now. So that's kind of my background here and why I think that Cobra Kai is actually expressing this very, very fundamental system that these two gentlemen, these two, in my opinion, masters, Peyton Quinn, who wouldn't label himself a master, but I believe he is in his own respect, and then Grandmaster Chow of the Praying Mantis system. So I'm going to get into this and why this, how they all kind of come together. So the first rule of Cobra Kai, is strike first, right? Now, Grandmaster Chow and Peyton Quinn are the exact opposite of John Kreese, the actual Cobra Kai teacher. Far removed, because John Kreese was kind of all about the ego, he lacked compassion, he was a jerk. So these guys are all very different, but they all preach the same thing. They all preach strike first, in their own way though. People ask me sometimes when they hear that, well, isn't Kung Fu supposed to be defensive? Well, it is defensive in that you defend yourself. You don't go around punching people in the face when they call you a name. That's not really self-defense. And you don't use it to prove to people how tough you are. That's for conquest. So the purpose of Kung Fu is actually to defend yourself. But within that, we know that the best defense is actually the good offense. You don't want to be, if someone attacks you, you don't want to be just relying on blocking and blocking and blocking and evading. Even though it might look really cool in the movies, in reality that doesn't really work. If someone keeps trying to hit you, you're eventually going to get hit, no matter how fast you are at avoiding. So we need to make sure we hit back, and the sooner you do, the more successful you are going to be. So that's what the strike first method kind of means. It doesn't mean that you have to attack first and, destroy your opponent. What it means, though, is you're being proactive, right? So strike first, and I think he even says this in Cobra Kai at one point, strike first means you take the initiative. That's very important. You don't want to have your opponent put you on the defensive. If you're on the defensive, eventually you're going to lose. You want to strike first for the sake of making the opponent react to you. So therefore, you control the situation, right? So strike first misinterpreted means you go around when someone calls you a name, you punch them in the face. Not what it means. It means that you want to act first, so the aggressor has to then respond to what you're doing. So they don't have time to think about what they're doing. They're reacting to you. If they're reacting and you're active, then you're going to have the advantage. You're going to move a little bit, you'll be faster, one step ahead of them. So that's what strike first means. So Cobra Kai, in that sense, actually really good point. Grandmaster Chow used to say the same thing. Strike first. Don't wait. The guy is going to be, if he's in your space and he's about to hit you, you don't have to wait. You do have to go on the offensive a little bit. Doesn't mean you've got to even hit, but it just means you've got to move first to force the other person to react to what you're doing. So the second rule is strike hard. Now this key has some different language depending on who you're asking. So it took me some time before I realized that Grandmaster Chow, Peyton Quinn, and Johnny Lawrence were all saying the same thing. On the surface, Cobra Kai's angle is pretty much straightforward. Hit as hard as you can, because you want to cause damage. Now, my real life teachers have a much more in-depth take on this second pillar. Peyton Quinn, and you'll see this if you get his book Real Fighting, which I highly recommend. There's another book too, and off the top of my head I can't remember right now, but if I do, I'm going to post it in the comment section of this video. But Peyton Quinn referred to this as break the balance, he would say. If your opponent has his balance, meaning he's standing on 2 feet, more or less rooted, he has a structure upon which to launch an attack and hit you. And if you don't understand this, just try this simple experiment. Just stand in front of a punching bag, if you got one, with your feet staggered in a fighting stance and drive a punch into the punching bag. You'll notice that you're hitting pretty hard, hopefully. Then lift one foot and balance on one leg, and then drive the punch in. And if you're not leaning into it because you want to keep your balance afterward, you'll notice that you're punching a lot lighter when you have one foot in the air. And then next, you can stand in front of the bag, jump up in the air and throw the punch while you're in midair, and you'll find you're probably hitting not so powerful either. I mean, the impact will look like it's there, but the actual power is not there because the root, the structure, you don't have that. You're not rooted into the ground. So we know that in order to actually throw with some strength, enough strength, you need to be rooted into the ground. You still be able to move around on your feet, but when you throw a punch, you've got to be somewhat rooted. That's where the power comes from that structure, right? Real life combat tends to be messy. It's random. It doesn't look as cool as you would hope that it does in a kung fu movie. People get hurt, and if you have to defend yourself against an unarmed attacker, it's a good chance you're going to get punched. So the first line of defense is don't get punched. Obviously, you can prevent that by punching first. Rule number 1, strike first, as I mentioned before. The second line of defense is if you do get punched, make sure it doesn't hurt that much. You can do this by taking the opponent's root away. So considering the 3 punches I mentioned above, 1 rooted, 1 on 1 foot, 1 in the air, if you had to pick one of those, right, or if you had to pick 2 out of 3 of those to get a hit with, you'd probably pick the second 2. You wouldn't want to pick the first one. That's going to hurt the most. Now, the punches that aren't rooted, they might hurt your feelings, they might break the skin a little bit, they're going to hurt, but more or less, they're less likely to knock you unconscious, which is important. If you're still conscious, then you can still fight, and if you're not, then you can't. So at least staying conscious in a self-defense situation is what's really important, right? When your body is pumping with adrenaline in an actual situation, those punches that aren't really strong enough to knock you out, there's a good chance you won't even notice them if the person throwing them is unrooted. They'll hurt you later, but not other than hurting your feelings, they're not really going to do much to knock you out if they don't have that power. So a good tactic is not letting your opponent get his root. So like Peyton Quinn used to say, break the balance, and that's why he used to favor knee attacks to the groin. You see all the time in movies when someone gets hit in the groin and they keel over, and it's maybe even kind of humorous, but in reality that doesn't necessarily happen when you factor in the adrenaline response. A lot of times someone might get hit, they're not even going to feel that pain until afterward when they cool down. They're still able to hit you and hurt you. So the purpose of those strikes to the groin, like knees to the groin, is not to inflict pain, but to actually lift the person up off of their root, so therefore they can't find that root to strike you. Now Grandmaster Chow taught the same thing. He just worded it differently. He taught always about shaking the foundation. He would say, shake the foundation, shake the foundation, shake the foundation. I can't tell you how many times I heard that trying to learn a throw or something, and he would just say, no, you haven't shaken the foundation, go back and do it again. So that was his way of basically applying the same thing. Strike hard, break the balance, shake foundation, all kind of the same thing. If you're not able to break the balance or shake the foundation when you hit, then why even bother? You're just basically, you're just angering the person. The life lesson here means, with strike hard, means that you have to be decisive and you have to commit, right? Same like in Kung Fu. Kung Fu training not only teaching you physically how to hit, but also to be committed, right? To be committed to something and be decisive. No one earns a significant rank like a black belt or a black sash in Kung Fu. No one earns that rank by simply trying it out and seeing if they're going to keep wanting to do it. At some point in the beginning of their training, they're going to realize this is for them, or then they're going to go all the way through, or they're not. So that same thing approach you want to take to your training. You either go for it, you commit, or you better get out of it. But if you have each foot in 2 separate boats, you're bound to fall in the water. So you want to make sure you commit both feet in one boat and paddle hard and give it everything you've got until you arrive at your destination. That's what strike hard means. That's how it pertains to real life. The third rule in Cobra Kai is no mercy. That was the third one, right? And that was the hardest one for me to connect. For a while I thought, hey, this is really neat, this is a great show. 2 of the 3 rules are things that we teach in Mantis Kung Fu. I totally disagreed with the third rule because I value compassion and I teach my students to do the same. So I couldn't see how this rule, no mercy, would apply to us when that's a big part of our system. And I found the same to be true with Grandmaster Chow and Peyton Quinn. I found them both to be caring, inspiring people who, although they taught amazingly destructive self-defense, they had no desire to hurt anyone. They were just really, really nice guys. It finally hit me the day before I ended up filming this, which is kind of what pushed me to do it. In my own words, no mercy would mean don't let up. Peyton Quinn would call this continuous attack, and he taught me that even if the technique used in self-defense is a simple one. Striking continuously is more important than using variety that you don't really need. And Grandmaster Chow would just say, don't stop, go. Why do you stop? Go. Don't hit and then see what happened. You keep going until the opponent is down, so that way you don't have to defend yourself anymore, and you end the conflict. So he didn't need to say much more than that. Everything in praying mantis kung fu is based on continuous attack. You never throw only one attack. You throw combinations and they flow together. Typically the combinations are of 3 moves, 6 moves, 9 moves, while at the same time changing height and changing angles to confuse the opponent. When combined with the previous 2 keys, this will ensure the best odds for a successful self-defense. So strike first means you put the opponent on the defensive right away. Strike hard means you break their balance and then you prevent them from delivering any effective counters because they don't have that root. And then finally, no mercy, meaning continuous attack, don't stop, means they can't turn the tables on you and go on the offensive, right? So as much as martial artists like to overcomplicate things and argue about trapping or striking or rolling or mounting, blah, 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 self-defense is actually quite simple. Using these 3 keys properly will take care of about, I don't know, 95 to 99% of physical self-defense. By what I mean by this is actual self-defense, not contest, right? Because those are different. If you're in like a a fight where it's 2 consenting adults, they decide to step outside. See, that's a little bit different. That's not really a fight in the sense of where you have someone having to defend themselves. When in a self-defense situation, you usually have someone that's more predatory and someone's more on the prey side, and they have to overcome that predator. That's what I mean when we talk about self-defense. So in that case, these 3 keys will help you be most effective in any kind of situation. So please don't misunderstand that. Don't confuse the differences between a self-defense situation and a combative contest, because they are quite different. So that's how I believe that those 3 rules of Cobra Kai actually apply really, really well to self-defense. And who would have guessed that an 80s movie villain and then a TV show character, even though they lack the value of compassion, they would still present the top 3 factors for successful combat. I don't know if it was Pat Johnson that actually did a lot of the choreography and writing for the original Karate Kid. I don't know how much he was involved in that actual writing there. One thing I wanted to add though is kind of a disclaimer, is that these keys, these fundamental keys here, strike first, strike hard, no mercy, they're not really good, nor are they bad. They're merely effective tools. So like everything else in Kung Fu, the way that they are used says a lot about the artists themselves, and the way they are used is the way the artist expresses themselves. So you can use them for your own conquest if you want to be a jerk, or you can use them to improve the lives of yourself, your own life, and the lives of others as well. So, and in praying mantis kung fu, it's very similar. A lot of times in the movies, kung fu, praying mantis kung fu sometimes, because it's awesome, is used to portray the bad guys because it's a little more aggressive. But it is an aggressive style. That doesn't mean its practitioners are aggressive people, and in most cases, it's actually quite the opposite. I notice when we teach at our Niagara Kung Fu, our physical location, we always see that martial paradox. We see that people are trained to be competent and capable of defending themselves, but they also find themselves less likely to fall into a situation where they would have to defend themselves physically because they're more aware and their ego is not pulled into proving anything. Anyway, thanks for checking this out. I hope you give that some thought. I hope you watch Cobra Kai, because it's a fantastic show, and I hope it inspires you to try some martial art as well if you're not currently. By the way, if you're not currently active in martial art, or active as much as you would like to be, then you can check out my 5 excuses. I'm going to put the link at the bottom there, the 5 excuses of why not, and seeing if those apply to you. And if they do apply to you, then you need to check out our online program so you can start training at home. It's so easy to do. You actually just click a few buttons and you're training. You don't even have to leave your house. You don't have to register for a live program where you have to drive to a club a couple times a week. You can just do it all online, and you can learn thoroughly in the comfort of your own home. Check that out by clicking below. All right, we'll talk to you soon.